You're going to be asked to read a lot of Shakespeare's language in the next few weeks. So I thought I'd give you some basic tips on some approaches you might take. This is one of his sonnets, Sonnet 132. And there are a lot of things about it which can be challenging at first glance anyway. But a few things that might help you a little bit. So if we kick off with the first line, thine eyes I love and they as pitying me. Thine is obviously a word that we don't use these days ourselves. So it's important to make sure you know some Elizabethan pronouns, thine and thy and thou and so forth. You need to know what those things mean. Usually the context can tell you anyway, but sometimes it can be a little strange, and so it's worthwhile sort of getting those under your belt. So thine eyes means your eyes I love. And you'll notice there's an inversion of the word order there. Oftentimes in especially traditional, poetry of a couple of hundred years ago, you'll get word orders inverted, where they reverse the order, basically to fit in with a rhyme scheme or to fit in with a certain set rhythmic pattern. And so instead of saying, I love your eyes, he says, that your eyes I love, or in this case, thine eyes I love. It's a pretty straightforward phrase, I love your eyes, but obviously there are a couple of little hurdles thrown in there that in longer, more sophisticated or more challenging contexts can make for a little bit of a hard time. So obviously bear in mind word order inversion, bear in mind that you're going to have some old-fashioned pronouns, some archaic pronouns we don't use before. Sometimes in Shakespeare also you will have him leaving out a word, ellipses. So thine eyes I love and they as pitying me. As pitying me seems, you might say, well, what does that mean? But really and again, context kind of can give you clues to this. But really what he's leaving out is the word if here. Thine eyes I love and they as if pitying me. And once you put in that if, it makes more sense. It's not an easy hurdle to get over. Again, you have to kind of use some context clues, but being aware at least that sometimes Shakespeare will leave out a word that is sort of implied from the context, can give you sort of that little extra clue. There's something else I might be looking for here. And then you have the basic element of the syntax, the sentence structure. And you have to be aware that sometimes there are interruptions to a sentence. There may be a lot of phrases, a lot of words that come between the main subject and its main verb. So in this case, thine eyes I love, and they, this is our subject, the subject to the main sentence, the main clause, they. But then he's interrupted, as if pitying me. And then he's got another interruption, because this knowing is not the main verb. You wouldn't say they knowing thy heart torment me. You're looking for the main verb. Knowing is just a little participle. It's the beginning of a participial phrase. If I came in and said, I loving my wife, period, doesn't make any sense, right? You're waiting for the main verb. I, loving my wife, decided to marry her, something along those lines. So you've got this kind of thing here where you've got they as pitying me, and then another phrase that interrupts, knowing thy heart torment me with disdain. We're still looking for the main verb, have put on black. That's the main verb. And so you kind of, when you're sort of translating, paraphrasing, you can kind of ignore these phrases. You can ignore these phrases for a little bit, and make sure you understand, here's the subject, here's its main verb. So then you've got, they have put on black. The eyes have put on black and loving mourners be. But one more thing here, loving mourners be, obviously we've got another inversion of word order. But also we've got this word be, which is a little unusual. Obviously, even if we put it into a normal word order, we get and be loving mourners. The eyes be loving mourners. Obviously, we wouldn't say be loving mourners, but we would say are loving mourners. Again, sometimes you have to do a little tweak to a verb because you get an unusual form of the verb put in. And then as you go through, you'll have words like this. Obviously, a word like Ruth, fairly archaic word. We don't typically use that. We do use a word ruthless, so that could give you a clue. But also, if you can't figure that out, then obviously you can look it up in a dictionary. But do make sure you look up those kinds of words. And I think that is all that I would like to say about this. Except for this verb here. Better becomes the grey cheeks of the east. You want to be careful, especially with older poetry. And, when talking about 16th, 17th century language of William Shakespeare, sometimes a word that's a perfectly ordinary word for us doesn't necessarily mean the same thing 400 years ago. Excuse me. So becomes here, we typically think of the word becomes as being a word meaning to sort of evolve into, to change into. But becomes can also mean to suit. People even today might say, oh, that shirt is very becoming, that dress is very becoming. It means it suits you. And so sometimes you need to make sure that you look a little further, maybe use a dictionary to make sure you get the correct version of the word. So a few little, just a little summary. Learn your Elizabethan pronouns. Thine means your, thy equals your, thou equals you, thee equals you. Watch for possible ellipses. As pitying me might well mean as if pitying me. You definitely want to locate the subject and its main verb. That's good. Just general good reading comprehension practice. Ignoring the descriptive phrases initially. So, and they have put on black. That's your main clause, and then you can add in the rest of it. And they, as pitying me, knowing thy heart torment me with disdain, have put on black. Be aware of inverted word order. They loving mourners be. They loving mourners be instead of they be loving mourners. Sometimes you'll encounter an odd form of the to be verb. They be loving mourners instead of they are loving mourners. And make sure, ask yourself whether you've got the right meaning. If the meaning of a word like becomes doesn't seem that you think it means, doesn't seem to fit, try out some other possibilities. Becomes here means suits and not changes into. The only other thing I would say is try to read for the sentences. Don't pause at the end of every line. In this particular poem, it doesn't really matter to do that, but typically you want to read through the lines to find what the sentences mean and sort of ignore the line breaks when you're trying to figure out meaning. Thine eyes I love, and they, as pitying me, knowing thy heart, torment me with disdain, have put on black, and loving mourners be, looking with pretty Ruth upon my pain. And truly not the morning sun of heaven better becomes the grey cheeks of the east, nor that full star that ushers in the even doth half that glory to the sober west, as those two morning eyes become thy face. Oh, let it then as well beseem thy heart to mourn for me, since morning doth thee grace, and suit thy pity like in every part. Then will I swear beauty herself is black, and all they foul that thy complexion lack.